Oh, hello. Nice to see you. My name's Mike Masey. I'm a senior developer at Yoyo. We're going to be having a little look at web components in this half an hour talk now. Some of you may be wondering, what on earth does tea or coffee have to do with web components? Some of you may be wondering what web components are. Now, hopefully, with the talks we've had so far, we've had an inkling, we've had some brilliant insight from Niels and so on so far. But I'd like to try and bring in some metaphorical analysis in there. So you can all hear me? 1, 2, testing, discombobulated, cabbage. I'm coming through clear. Let's have some fun with web components. So I imagine that the majority of people watching right now, it's been a long day, could probably do with your preferred caffeinated beverage of choice, whether that's tea, whether that's coffee, whether it's a Red Bull, whatever you want. And I also imagine that you all enjoy your preferred caffeinated beverage in your own certain way, whether that's with milk, without milk, with a biscuit, definitely with a biscuit. The point I'm saying is, whatever you like however you like your tea or coffee, it's good for you. Whatever works for you is right. And the same can be said for web components. Now, web components are actually a collection of technologies, not a single thing. If anything, you could almost view them as ingredients. Now, our ingredients for our web components consists of 3 main technologies. We're going to be looking at custom elements, the shadow DOM, and the HTML templates and slots. Now, the first thing we're going to look at is the bean. Now, when we're thinking about coffee, and I have to admit, I have to confess to all you tea lovers out there, I'm afraid that the title of this talk is a bit misleading. We're going to be focusing on coffee. If you like tea, that's fine. Feel free to swap out the coffee bean for a tea leaf. It's fine by me, fine for you, whatever you enjoy. The point is, with the coffee bean, it is a very simplistic thing. It doesn't really do much on its own, but you can do a lot with it. You can grind it up, you can make a coffee, you can make a cake, you could add it to some water, stain some paper, and make a pirate map. It's probably going a bit beyond the topic of this, but our bean in the web component land is the custom element. Now, a custom element on its own is kind of what it says on the tin. It's a custom HTML element. In the same way that we have a lot of native HTML elements, such as your headings, paragraphs, tags, labels, go on and on. Custom elements let us create, as we've seen, our own elements. Now, this can be really, really powerful, because sometimes you want to have a bit more than the native functionality. So let's have a look at how these are made. We're going to be looking at the very base example of this. And as we've heard, this is native browser technology that works in everything. So it begins with a class, and we extend an HTML element. That HTML element will let us adopt any of those properties that that element had to begin with. Once we've got our class, we create a constructor. Inside that, we make sure we call a super. Now, what super does is make sure it initializes any of the required methods or any bits of code that was in our extended element. And that can be really useful, so make sure you don't forget that. The important thing and nice thing about this is you can also extend another custom element. So if you've got a custom element with a load of various native scripts, or it's doing something that you want to include in your new element that you're extending from it, that super will make sure that all that gets configured as well. Once we've got our class, add it to our custom elements list. That custom elements is a global variable. We define it, we give it a name. As Philip said earlier on, it has to have at least a single hyphen, 2 or more words. Those single word names for elements are actually reserved for native elements. So you've always got to be at least 2 words. So if you ever get caught out, just keep an eye out for it. And with that, we've got a really, really basic coffee bean custom element. Now, this is what it looks like. Again, we've seen some examples of other custom elements or web components. This is what our coffee bean looks like. Now, we've heard a little bit about lifecycle callbacks, and I'd like to go a little bit deeper into what these are. Now, if you've used something like Vue or React or Angular, all of those technologies, this is probably quite familiar to you already. And custom elements come with these built in. First one is the connected callback. Now this will fire whenever the custom element is added onto the DOM. There's also an is connected attribute that you can also call at any point in your custom element code just to check to make sure it's definitely connected. We have the disconnected callback, and that fires, you can imagine, when you disconnect or remove the element from the DOM. Now both of these will fire if you actually move your custom element from one part of the DOM to another part in the order you'd associate them. So disconnected, move, connected. The attribute change callback, you can configure to fire on specific attributes that you want to, in the same way that you can set up props in React, Angular. Quite a bit of configuration, so we'll have a little look at that in a second. And then we have the adopted callback, and that is probably less used, but it can be triggered whenever you move your custom element to another document. So these are our callbacks. So an example of that would be, we've got our coffee bean, and whenever this gets added to the DOM, we'll see in the console that the bean is ready to go. As I said, the attribute change callback has a little bit more to it. So it begins with a static getter value property called observe attributes. Now this, you want to return an array of string values. This can be a single string array, or it can be as many as you want. This will essentially tell the custom element that it wants to keep an eye on those attributes, and then in turn fire the attribute change callback whenever it sees a change. Again, if you're used to those frameworks, this will look maybe kind of similar to say a React hook, for example. It will give you the name in this instance of the changed attribute, and that's because where you can define multiple attributes, it can always give you a different response. So you can see in here, I'm checking to see is the change attribute, the green method. And then, of course, it will give you the old value and the new value, so you can do whatever you want with it. So if we go back to our custom element, I've now changed it to a tasty Arabica bean, coffee bean. We're going to give it a brew method. And in this example I made earlier, we're just going to use the dev tools to go in. We're going to update our brew method attributes, give it espresso, and see what happens. Delicious, what we like. Now, this probably isn't what you want for your end users, right? You don't want them to have to jump into the dev console and do all this stuff. So let's try and add a bit more sugar or milk, something to give it a bit more depth. Sugar, I know it's getting quite late, maybe like a bit of brandy in your coffee. I know I sometimes do. And what we're referring to here is going to be the shadow DOM. Now, we've heard a little bit about the shadow DOM and its encapsulating nature. I just want to go a little bit deeper into how this works. So the concept of the DOM in HTML is now kind of set up into two areas. We have the light DOM, which is where previously you tend to put in all your code. So if you're writing a straight HTML file, putting in any of your divs, spans, headings, that'll live in the light DOM. Now, the shadow DOM is an area that is entirely separate from the light DOM. You can, if you actually inspect an input element, a native input element with the shadow DOM, view shadow DOM features in the dev consoles, you'll notice there's actually a lot more going on in that element than you realize. And we can create our own shadow DOM. Now, this is completely separate from the light DOM, so it's completely encapsulated, and it won't be affected by any styles, which is really useful. So how do we make the shadow DOM with our custom element? Again, it starts within our custom element with our constructor. We're creating a variable called shadow in this example. Coffee bean, in this example, we're using this. This is the coffee bean. We're opening the shadow by calling attack shadow and giving it mode open. The mode value can be open or closed. If it's open, it essentially means that JavaScript can reach into the shadow DOM still, which can be useful for getting some elements for a feature we're going to look at in a bit. The other option is closed, and that completely shuts off the shadow DOM, so it can't be interfered with by anything at all. So we've got our shadow DOM open. Now let's add some stuff to it. So within our JavaScript file, within our custom element, we're going to create a form, add a little bit of code here. We've got label, an input button, and then we're just going to append that child to our shadow. Now, that on its own won't really look like much because there's no styles in there, right? And the styles won't be able to, these elements won't be affected by anything in the light DOM because they're encapsulated. So let's add some styles. And again, we're just going to put this into our actual JavaScript for this time. We don't have to do it this way, but for this example, we're going to create our element style in our text content, chuck some stuff in here. Now, as Niels and Coase pointed out, you can use this sort of concept to change some of those values to CSS variables, which means you can actually access some of the CSS and styles from your sort of global CSS in your shadow DOM, which is pretty cool. Focusing on that there. There are other technologies as well. So if you do use SAS or Less, or if you use something like Tailwind, there are various plugins and packages and NPM packages that can let you integrate directly into shadow DOMs. I'm not personally investigated them because we don't tend to at Yoyo use stuff like this quite as much, but there is technology out there that can help you out with those sorts of styles. So to simplify our custom element bit, I've just moved those bits of code where we're creating elements into two methods, create the style and create the shadow DOM. And as you can see, we're appending both the style and the form to our custom element. And if we have a look at what that looks like now, you'll see the coffee bean element just on its own, but it's actually rendering out a form that has a little bit of fun functionality. Entering a brew method, we can put in espresso. I don't know if you'll be able to see the little pop-up, but it says espresso. That's delicious. Another cool thing, again, slightly covered, was what happens when we create another one with two shadow DOMs. So here we can see I've added another coffee bean little form. It's created two versions. But some of you HTML sort of aficionados may have noticed something that could have caused an issue, which was in our form element, we've got these labels and inputs that are referencing each other using the for ID pattern. Now, if this was in the light DOM, in a normal form, this would actually cause an issue in that in the second form, if I clicked on this label, it would take us directly to this input, which obviously isn't what we want. We get some conflicts in terms of functionality. Thankfully, though, we're in the shadow DOM. So these two elements are completely separate. They don't care about each other at the moment. They are on their own. So I can fill this one, I can press the label for the second form, and it focuses exactly where I want it to, and each one has their own bit of functionality. Let's see, so if I type in a random thing here, second one, the functionality forms, they won't overlap as well. High five, you rock is what that second one says. There's probably something worth noting about the shadow DOM around accessibility. So for the most part, if you're writing any code in your shadow DOM, as long as you're writing good semantic HTML markup, you shouldn't need to worry too much about accessibility. As long as your default code, if you think semantic first, you should be fine. If you do need to write some real custom type of functionality where you want to recreate a button element or a select input, just be aware that you personally will need to include all the various ARIA attributes that will make sure that it can be accessible to various screen readers and other assistive technology that people rely on to navigate the web. That's your responsibility when you're making a custom element. Now, there's an area in this that's a bit tricky. If we go back to our label and input. Now, again, if these are both within the light DOM or both within the shadow DOM, these two can talk to each other. The native browser functionality for the for and ID connection, that will work. But if we move our input into the shadow DOM, the label won't be able to find the input. It'll be looking around for it, but no luck. And that's one of the potential issues with the shadow DOM. You've got to be careful about how you're configuring your elements and how you're setting this up, even if you do these for and for IDs. So this can make you sad about your coffee bean. We don't want to be sad about our coffee bean, right? We want to be happy. Now, there is a draft spec coming in. It's called the Accessibility Object Model, or the AOM. Now, this is a really cool bit of tech that's coming in. It's a JavaScript API, and this will let us have more control over the accessibility of our elements using native attributes. So an example of what this could look like is we have a form field. That form field over here is an element. It has a property on it called ARIA labeled by, and we tell it the actual element. That form label is the actual label, label element. So, as I said, using the ID and for pattern to connect an input and a label that have a barrier of the shadow DOM won't work, but this will. Because we can keep the shadow DOM open, we can grab that element, that form field within the shadow DOM using our JavaScript, we can actually connect that link. So that's something to be looking out for and wary about, because in the future, this should make us happy about our coffee needs. So we've got a little bit of styling, we've done a bit more to our shadow DOM and to our web component. But say you have some kind of way that you prefer your coffee. If you've got a preferred barista that makes you the perfect flat whites, or if you've got one of those coffee pot machines, you know, that always, every single time you pull that coffee, it's just how you like it. For this, our analogy is going to be pointing at HTML templates and slots. So, as you can imagine, a template is a template of HTML. Now, this is what, again, this is intentionally small and a bit clunky. This is what our custom element looks like at the moment with all the styles and HTML within that. And to me, I'm not a big fan of that. I want to take that out and I want to manage my HTML and my CSS elsewhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the template element. Now, the template element is a really cool, fairly new element that works unlike many others. If you put any other HTML markup within an element tag, it will essentially be ignored by the browser. If you put an iframe in there, it won't try and get the iframe. If you put an image in there, it won't try and load the image. If you put a video in there, it won't care about the video. The browser will leave everything in the template element until you tell it to go into the DOM, until you instantiate it. And this can be really powerful. You don't have to use this in the custom element, by the way, or the shadow DOM. You can use this just in general if you want to have a bit of completely separate functionality. Again, web components can be used however is good for you. If you only want to use a small part of it, that's fine. We're going to make a little template here, giving it an ID so we can access it later. We're going to add our styles, we're going to add our form all within there. Like I said, we could use potentially some pre-processing in the future to make that type a bit nicer from the developer experience. But that's what we're going to leave it like for now. We're then going to update our custom elements. So rather than creating them where we've got this create style and create shadow form, we're going to essentially replace that with some code to get that element. We'll put that element in our document, by the way. We're going to get the element. And then down here in our append child, you can see we're going template content. Now we want to get content of the template and we're going to clone it. This is important. There can be some funky functionality if you don't use the clone node in your template content when appending them to the shadow. The true value in that clone node, for those of you who aren't aware, that will essentially make sure it will get all the descendants within that template and get everything that you want. So that's created essentially the same thing as our initial code did when we made it in the JavaScript. There's another cool thing, though, that we want to look at, which is slots. Again, we've had a little look at this before, but let's dig deeper into this. This is the form section of our shadow DOM in the HTML template at the moment. This is kind of good, right? It does the job, but it's not very extensible, right? If every single time we create a coffee bean, we're going to have enter a brew method and create my coffee, you may want to be a bit more inventive. You might want to change it up a bit, and that's where slots come in. So a slot is another element. You provide it with a label, and you can still give it a fallback value. So this can be really useful stuff you must have. Then when we go back to our, just to focus on it, when we go back to our coffee bean element, within that, we're going to create, in our example, just two span elements. We're going to give it a slot equals, and that will tie to the slots that we've created in our template. Now, an important thing to note here, I've used span elements so that when they are used in the slot area, we will get a span within a label. There's potentially nothing stopping anyone from changing that span to another label, which will actually end up a label within a label, which we don't want, right? So that's one thing to be wary of when you're using slots, is try to use them in a way that's easy to use for your end users. But with that, it lets us have a bit of fun. Now, unfortunately, the GIF that happens automatically started a bit early. But you can see in here, we've got the template code. I've created a new coffee bean, and within there, you can see my slots. And as you can see on the right, we've got the enter brew method, which is the default, and we've got what would you like on the right. Let's see, the old one should still be saying when you press Codegarden, it should give you something good. I think we have some fans of Umbraco Coffee watching right now. High five, you rock to Codegarden and Umbraco Coffee. It pairs lovely with lunch on a Friday. So if any of you haven't had any Umbraco Coffee before, check it out. Now, there's another cool thing about custom elements that I want to have a little look at too, and that is extending native elements. So native elements tend to have a lot of accessibility stuff built into them by default, and you can extend that if you want to have a button. That's a very common example we see in a lot of example code online, is you'll be extending a button element to make sure you get all the nice ARIA stuff and accessibility related DOM code from that button. In my example, I'm going to have a look at the lovely anchor tag. Now, this is a little bit funky the way I've laid it out, just to make it nice and big for you to read, but the purpose of this link is to essentially open up a Twitter share as an example. Now, at the moment, the default behavior for that is a bit funky. I don't really like it. If I click on that link, it opens up in a whole new tab. It's quite in your face. It takes me away. And that's not great from a UX point of view, right? You want to keep people a little bit more focused. So what can we do about that by extending a native element? Well, in order to extend the HTML element, we're going to create another custom element. We're going to start, as always, by creating a class, but this time we're going to extend from the HTML anchor element. Then when we go down to our define section, we're going to extend the actual anchor tag. Now, this should essentially be the same as the anchor tag that you would use. When we go, when we're actually in our code as well, we're going to add a connected callback, and we're essentially going to intercept the standard click event for the custom element, for the anchor tag, and we're going to make it pop up in a window. We're going to make sure we're doing some nice way by adding the event listen when you connect it, removing it when you disconnect it. Maybe overkill, but these are examples. So we've got our anchor tag. Now, you may be thinking to make this into our pop-up link custom element that we change anchor tag to pop-up link. But actually, when you're extending a native element, what you want to be doing is using this is action. So we are saying this anchor tag is actually the pop-up link custom element that we've made. Now, the cool thing about this is if you do end up on a browser that doesn't support custom elements, or say you're traveling in London when it's peak hours and you've got absolutely terrible signal and the JavaScript doesn't quite load properly, we're thinking about progressive enhancement here. It still may not be quite as nice as opening up in that pop-up window, but at least the anchor will still work. So that's another thing to point out around web components and custom elements is they don't have to be completely JavaScript. They won't work without it. Think about progressive enhancement. You want to make things just a little bit better than when you don't have JavaScript. It's completely possible and it should be done with web components as well. But anyway, let's see what this does now. We've got our share some tasty coffee, and when we click it, as we expected, it opens up in this nice little pop-up window, and it's a little less aggressive to our eyes. Now, we have some time left, so I'm going to have a little look at a semi-live example of a slightly more complex custom element that we have over here. Here we got a coffee modal. I'll make that nice and big for any of you in the back who can't see. Probably. Now, our coffee modal here, we're giving it some content that we want to appear when the modal opens up. We want to say, here you go, and we're going to include an image of something. Who knows what it's going to be? Now, by default, a modal tends to have quite a lot of functionality in it that we need to think about. You've got a lot of styles in there. I'm not going to go into all this because, as you can see, there's quite a lot going in. But from a consumer of this custom element, we don't really need to worry about that. We just need to worry about creating our coffee modal and putting the content we want to appear in there. So let's see what happens when we actually use this. Now, oh, that's too much. So when we click, ta-da, it's the Umbraco Coffee, guys. So as you can see, there's a lot going on here. We've got a lot of styling happening. We've got this close functionality. If I press escape on my keyboard, we'll make sure that that's still working. This example hasn't included it, or I think I broke it when I was working on it. But if you could include your tab locks within your modal, We include all the ARIA information. So if you're using this with a screen reader, it's reading out, here you go as a title, and you can read out the content and description. That's one of the powerful things about web components as well, is if you build them in an accessible way, the people who actually end up using them get accessibility built in. And I'm a big fan of that. So that was a quick modal example. So we've been looking at web components. The main thing I want all of you watching is to understand that web components are a collection of technologies. They can be really powerful, and you can use them however you want to use them and however works well for you. You could just use a custom element to wrap around a bit of functionality just so you can access the DOM. You could create a full-on, customized, completely encapsulated element that you share inside maybe a UI library. You could add some CSS variables with no style, so you can, well, you can see where I'm going with this, right? You can make a whole UI library for the Umbraco back office. We have the bean. Think about the bean. Custom element, humble bean, or tea leaf. For you tea leaf lovers. We have the shadow DOM, which is our milk, sugar, brandy. You know, gives it a little bit of style. And we got our templates for when we want to keep things consistent. These slides, should you want to see them, can be found at this link. So I'm going to leave this on here for a couple more seconds. Let's just stare at the camera, kind of scarily. You got that? Yeah, good. At the end of these links, I do have a bunch of links to other resources for web components and custom elements. But with that, I'm done. Thank you all so very, very much. Have a wonderful evening.